This is The Weekly Set, an official podcast of TheTotalScreen.com.
I wish I was the monster you think I am.
You have come here to beseech me?
Yes, for your soul.
Madness can be a medicine for the modern world.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Weekly Set, the official podcast of The Total Screen. I am your host. My name is Tyson, and joining me today, as always, is my partner in crime here at The Total Screen, William Rohrig.
Hello.
Okay, so today we are doing episode 270. We're recording this on August 31st, 2020, and we are primarily going to be talking about Lovecraft Country, the third episode of the first season, first and only so far season, titled Holy Ghost. But before that, I wanted to kind of catch up on some other stuff that I've been watching recently, that I'd recommend that is kind of interesting stuff. So, we're just going to get through that pretty quickly, but, Warrior Nun is a show on Netflix that's, people have been comparing it. There's two new shows on Netflix that I'm both talking about where people have compared it to Buffy recently. It's like structurally. Neither one, I think, really fits it. If of the two, I think Warrior Nun probably fits it the closest. They kind of have their own version of the Scooby Gang by the end. But it's basically, I kind of was holding back because I'm not really into kind of religious stuff, but it's not really about that. It's kind of more just like a fun adventure show that's kind of just framed under like a religious structure, but kind of departs from that a bit.
Right.
So I mean, it's like, imagine it's like a little bit of like the Da Vinci Code, but like mostly like Buffy. That's kind of what it is. So, I think that's a decent show, so people might want to check that out. The other one that's kind of being compared to Buffy that I think is a little bit more of a reach to say that, but I actually liked, I think, more than Warrior Nuns, is a show called Teenage Bounty Hunters. The other thing that people bring up in regards to this show that I think is much more accurate is, have you ever seen the movie Saved?
I think I know of it. I've never seen it.
It's, I think, at least 10 years old. I think it might be older. But it was like
have like Mandy Moore. I think
I don't
that's
remember.
What I'm thinking about.
I think it might have had like Kieran Culkin in it or something.
Anyway,
it was about like a bunch of like religious people. And it was kind of like, it wasn't like criticizing them, but at the same time, it was kind of like showing their naivete, and also like kind of as it was doing like a coming of age kind of story. And that's kind of what Teenage Bounty Hunters is like. It's like a very southern religious community, conservative, but within this community, there's these two twin sisters, and they get involved in bounty hunting in a kind of like, unrealistic but fun way. And yeah, they get involved with a group of bounty hunters, and they start like hunting bounties because they're valuable, because a lot of the bounties that they're hunting are actually like other kind of people within their community, like rich or upper middle class, conservative Christian group people, that have like these sketchy past or something, or have done something sketchy, and so they have a bounty. And so yeah, it's just kind of a fun show. If you have seen Saved, if you like that, it's kind of got a little bit of that in it. So, it's actually a pretty decent show. The next show I wanted to bring up is Friday Night Dinner, and this one I think you'd actually really dig, Will. It's a British comedy series, and one of the things that's in it is that when we watch Spaced, remember that art neighbor Brian?
Yes.
He's in the show. He plays like the neighbor, and he's perfect. He's so good. He's so hilarious. The structure of the show is interesting because it's basically every episode is this family having dinner together on a Friday night. That's the same exact structure. There's like running gags to the same thing. Like every single time the father makes a joke about the mom's cooking being like a tasty bit of squirrel or something, and then laughs hysterically as everybody else groans. It's like this like running gag through the entire thing. And there's like tons of those, like tons of like running gags, and it all fits within the same structure. They're getting together for dinner on a Friday night, and there's always some kind of wacky thing that ends up happening that gets in the way of that. So it's just a fun comedy, and I think you just dig the guy who played Brian in Spaced. Like the actor's name is Mark Keep, and he's hilarious in this show as the neighbor. Next up is Bill and Ted Face the Music. Have you watched this yet?
I have not watched it.
So I'm not going to spoil anything. I'm just going to say that, like, I wasn't 100% happy with the way it ended, but, like, when it did end, I felt, like, really kind of hopeful and happy. It's like one of those kind of movies. Yeah. It's one of those kind of movies that just makes you feel good by the end. So I definitely needed that. Unfortunately, the second I finished the movie, I read the news that Chadwick Boseman died. So that was kind of like a rude awakening.
I saw you tweet about that, yeah.
Yeah, it sucked. It's like, I just like got out of this movie and I'm like, oh, I feel good and happy. And then I picked up my phone.
That was a shock.
Yeah.
That was devastating to learn about.
Yeah, we'll get more into that. I think at the end of the podcast, after we finish Lovecraft Country, I kind of wanted to do like a little, like, look back or something, talk about Chadwick Boseman because he was a good actor. And we don't normally do that, but like, it's really shocking. And, you know, I thought it would be a good thing to bring up. But yeah, so, Bill and Ted Face the Music is good. There is a character in it that's like a robot character, and I don't want to spoil anything else by saying anything else beyond that. I'm only bringing up to say that guy steals the show. Fucking hilarious, amazing. Played by an actor who's been in the show Barry. He's a very iconic role in the show Barry. If you've seen that, and you'll probably recognize him once you have that in your mind. But completely steals the show. Hilarious. And yeah, definitely. It's a fun movie, and I recommend anybody to check it out if you want something just to kind of take you out of the dour mood that this whole year has been, if only for a brief reprieve. And lastly, and this one I believe you watched at least some of, is High Score on Netflix. Did you get around to watching any of it?
I watched episode 2, the Nintendo episode, I guess.
Okay.
Because it was like all about Nintendo, and I did that intentionally. But no, I didn't do it for fanboy reasons, just that you had recommended that specifically to me.
Yeah,
before.
There's a really funny story in there, like, and it really shows the presentation of the series.
Yeah, like you were talking about like the game counselor. I thought that was like really cool. I thought it was funny how like Nintendo apparently like made prospective game counselors take a test about the games, and how like he just totally cheated on the test. He wrote down the answers and like hid them in his sunglasses, and he said he got 100 on.
He cheated to get through. Yeah, it was funny.
He cheated to get through. Yeah, there's some interesting tidbits in there. Nothing. Me being like a diehard Nintendo fanatic, nothing crazy that I didn't already know. I did like showing them like reconstruct the claymation Mario model for like the cover of Nintendo Power #1.
Yeah,
I thought that was neat. What else was neat? Hearing like, the interview stuff with Hip Tanaka was pretty good.
Yeah.
Hearing about like his early days working at Nintendo. Again, like
experimenting with sound using the chips and stuff.
Yeah, I think the most surprising thing I learned from Hip Tanaka was like the sound Mario makes walking in Donkey Kong wasn't the intended sound. It's just the way the chip works.
Happy accident, yeah.
Yeah, happy accident. But now it's like iconic, you know, you can't think of it any other way. But it was interesting to hear like it's like no, that's just a happy accident.
Yeah.
That came out sounding like that.
And that's how you did it. You like literally would touch leads on a circuit,
right?
And like a sound would come out, and you go, "Oh, that sounds about right." You know, like you have to think like now we think like, "Oh, if I play this note and then I muffle it," it's like no, they had no ability to do that. It was like, they literally had to go, "If I touch this with this item, what sound does it make?" Oh, that sounds about right. Let's do that.
And the one woman from Nintendo, God, what was her name already?
The marketing woman?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember her name, but yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Like her OCD about like
the layout on like Nintendo Power.
Gail Tilden, I think, was her name.
Yeah.
Yeah, about the layout and the fact that like apparently like the design editor that they hired apparently like got so fed up with her that like he quit before the first issue was even put together. It was like
yeah, I mean, that was a fun story about how like they went to Japan and it was based on like Japanese magazine layout styles and stuff that really weren't common here at the time.
Yeah, apparently like the idea to do Nintendo Power came from Japanese magazines.
Yeah.
Arakawa being Japanese himself, and the president of Nintendo obviously like came up with it. President of Nintendo of America came up with that idea. That was pretty interesting.
Yeah. There's lots of like cool little things like that. And it's like, I think you'd agree with me that, like I said, it's not necessarily the best example of like history as far as like game documentaries go. What it's good at is more like telling personal stories.
It's mostly anecdotes, like,
yeah.
You know, and it's mostly stuff that, like, if you're already hardcore into this stuff, you know most of the stuff. I knew about the Universal Donkey Kong lawsuit and the outcome. I even knew about John Kirby, although I'm not really sure. Like, they kind of like said like Kirby was based on John Kirby, and I'm not really sure if that's anything but conjecture.
And it's
like,
just the name.
Yeah, it's just it's just the name. Somebody should ask Sakurai if like the name Kirby really was based on the lawyer or not. Like I don't know if like Sakurai would like even know that.
I think it's likely the truth, but it's just, I don't think it was the character was based on it, just named after.
No, I don't think
it's like the same thing with Mario. Like Mario was named after like a landlord they had, you know?
Supposedly.
Yeah, but it's the character wasn't based on the landlord. Like the character had already existed. It was they needed a name, and so they just used the name of somebody they knew.
That's the thing. Like Kirby might have been named after the lawyer, but like they went like a step further and implied that Kirby's design was based on him, and I don't think
doubt that.
I don't think Sakurai was sitting there thinking about Nintendo.
I don't think Sakurai ever
lawyer
met the guy
when he was like designing Kirby for the first time, you know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I doubt he ever met the guy, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's an issue like that. Yeah, totally. I just think it was named after, and that's it. But so that's the thing, and I kind of mentioned that to you when I was talking about the series to you before you watched it, that it is like that. Like the history is a little sketchy, and some of it seems a little off. Some of it seems to be that they're implying things that aren't actually the case. And you didn't watch it yet, but the Sega episode really did that, where they really kind of made the implication that Sega just completely destroyed Nintendo during and it's like, no, that didn't happen. You know, like it didn't happen like that.
No, Sega made it. Here's what Sega did. Sega made it more than a one-horse race, for sure. They did provide stiff competition for Nintendo in the 90s. Sega actually opened the door for all Sega actually did open the door for like all of the consoles that we got in the 90s, like the flood of consoles, because Sega's success in the marketplace against Nintendo really like convinced a bunch of other people that they could be successful too. And that's how you ended up with 3DO and the Jaguar and the friggin' CDI. And then eventually
all systems that tried to do what Sega did, which was like criticize Nintendo for being kiddie.
Right. And even the PlayStation, which it actually ended up being successful because, you know, Sony was like smart about how they went about it, you know, like.
Yeah.
But
oddly enough, they never even got into the whole Sony Nintendo thing in this entire season. So I think there's going to be a second season, and they'll probably end up getting into that.
God, the whole Sony Nintendo thing is such an odyssey. And also like I'm practically convinced because Ken Kutaragi, the creator of the PlayStation, he designed the sound chip that Nintendo used in the SNES.
Yeah.
And I kind of think
apparently he approached Nintendo about it too. Like Nintendo didn't contract him. Like he thought that the sound that was in video games was crap, and basically like approached Nintendo about it.
Yeah, he approached Nintendo about it. And I'm also like, this is a little conspiracy theory like type thing, but I'm also wondering if Ken Kutaragi was trying to use this SNES as a Trojan horse to get Sony into the gaming industry.
There were a few sketchy things about the SNES CD drive that Sony was working on.
Yeah.
Some sketchy things in the contract that would have given them a little bit more power than they probably should have had.
Right. Yeah, like I was talking about to somebody else about this, but I think ultimately in the end, the way the contract was written and stuff, ultimately I think what Sony was trying to do was they were trying to take over the SNES and make it their platform.
Yeah, they were trying to basically like eat Nintendo out of their own system.
Yeah. Nuts.
So they never got into that story because there's fertile ground there for stuff. I imagine that's probably going to be if they do a second season of this, which based on the popularity of this is likely. But yeah, like the main thing I kind of want to talk to you about with it is that I just really enjoyed like the structure, like when they would tell a story, they would do an interview. They used like these really cool kind of like pixel art animations to like kind of convey the story. And the example, the one you ended up watching had like the game counselor, and they had the part where like he was like training, like in training to be a game counselor after he'd been hired. They said, and the guy comes in and he's old, and then he started barking out like a drill sergeant. And the way they animated it and stuff was like really funny, you know?
Oh yeah. Like I loved the animations. I loved like the little thing, like at the beginning when it shows the establishing shot in Japan, and you see all these Nintendo sprites running around the screen.
Oh yeah, popping up and with the sounds.
Popping up with sounds like Mario and Donkey Kong and everything. That was pretty neat. I mean, yeah. I do like the presentation. It's clear though to me from this one episode, it's more of like a popcorn documentary for like a casual audience.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Then like people like hardcore into it, because if you're deep into your gaming history and stuff, you're probably going to get annoyed by some stuff in here for sure.
Yeah, and that was definitely the case with me as well. Like, and like that's what I was telling you about, like with last week, where I was saying that the history's a bit off. It's a bit loose. There's implications that are made that just aren't accurate, you know, and stuff. And that's throughout it. And that, if that's all the show was, it would be a really frustrating watch. Like I wouldn't enjoy it. But what made it are the little, you know, anecdotes that they put in and the way they presented them in the telling. That's what made it work. And I'm hoping with the second season that they put the focus more on that than on like trying to convey it as like a serious documentary. Because I think it works better when it's not being a serious documentary, when it's just being kind of a collection of anecdotes. I think that's when it works.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm hoping that that's what they do. Like, I don't need them to run down the history of the Nintendo Sony thing we were just talking about, but I'd love to see some anecdotes about it from people that were involved. Like, and seeing it with that presentation style would be really cool too. So, but yeah, so that's High Score on Netflix. So, I'm glad you checked out that episode. Are you going to watch any more of it?
I'll probably watch more of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
There's still some more Nintendo stuff in there. There's like the, Star Fox stuff.
Yeah, there's Star Fox stuff. Yeah, I mean, I'll watch it for sure. It's I looked at the episodes and yeah, it is kind of like all over the place. Cause like, we go from like entire episode about, Nintendo to the next episode is apparently about RPGs.
Yeah. And mostly about like PC RPGs. Not like, we're not talking like Final Fantasy and stuff. Although Final Fantasy is in there a little bit. But they kind of brought it up weird. Like, they made an implication about like a game. Like, they kind of hinted like, and then there'd be something huge in Japan. And then you think they're going to be talking about Dragon Quest, because that's the game, the RPG that was huge in Japan that really spun off RPGs there, you know? And instead it starts talking about Final Fantasy, and it's like, that really wasn't like initially that big of a deal there, you know? Like,
Dragon Quest basically defined what the JRPG is. It's weird because if you're going to talk about RPGs and gaming, it's like, yeah, you can't mingle them, because like Western RPGs and Japanese RPGs have completely divergent histories. Like, Japanese RPGs are basically based off of a single Western RPG, like really early, but it hugely diverges from that, especially like Dragon Quest, you know?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, once you get to Dragon Quest, then everything made in Japan wants to be Dragon Quest.
Dragon Quest wrote the JRPG rulebook, you know? And then Dragon Quest is like the Dungeons and Dragons of Japanese RPGs. They kind of like establish the rules that everybody else is based on. So yeah, they made this big implication like they were going to talk about Dragon Quest and ended up talking about Final Fantasy. And the reason why is because they were interviewing Amano, who did the art for the early Final Fantasy games.
And I also suspect because Final Fantasy is more recognizable to a Western audience. Since
I think that's it, but I think it's almost more likely that it's because of who they were able to interview.
Right.
They have a lot of stories throughout the series about Miyamoto, but not as many as you'd expect. And the reason why is because they never interviewed Miyamoto. So you only hear about Miyamoto, who's like such a huge figure in gaming, in references to stories from like Drew Goddard and stuff. You know, not Drew Goddard. God, what's his name at Argonaut? Anyways, the Star Fox guys. Like, you hear stories about Miyamoto from them, you know? So you get like those ones. And you got like a little bit of Miyamoto, probably less than you expected, huh, in the Nintendo episode?
Yeah, but that's fine. I would rather they interview somebody like Hip Tanaka than Miyamoto, because it's kind of like a meme now where like all of Nintendo is Miyamoto.
Yeah.
And I appreciate them highlighting other people who actually worked at Nintendo back in the day, you know, to kind of like say, you know, like other people made, you know, helped make Nintendo games too.
Well, the thing is, I don't think that was their intention.
No, I know.
I don't think it was their intention to try to highlight that. I think they very much would have liked to have done it almost entirely about Miyamoto, but they probably just couldn't score the interview.
Oh, they definitely did, especially when they when they start talking about him and they start talking, Gail Tilden starts talking about Nintendo, you know, Miyamoto being the Steven Spielberg of Nintendo, and how like he made Mario and Zelda, and, like nobody else is mentioned, no other franchises are mentioned.
Yeah.
Like they definitely like go in on the whole Miyamoto is Nintendo narrative, even if they've interviewed Hip Tanaka at the beginning of the like episode.
Yeah.
They still go with that direction, and it's kind of like I'm just like kind of because I'm like that's such a mainstream casual game documentary thing to do.
Yeah, I don't think there's like a single mention of like Gunpei Yokoi or
no.
Who's like an important figure and a tragic figure in gaming as well. It's
Yokoi is arguably as important or more important to Nintendo than Miyamoto.
Yeah. But it's that's what I mean though. It's like that if you're gonna go into it for like a balanced historical viewpoint of Nintendo, that's not what you're gonna get from this. It's just kind of go in for the anecdotes. The other stuff, if you're like really big into gaming and know the history, some of it's probably gonna annoy you because they do make implications that aren't necessarily true. But they're doing that as like a framing device. Like they're trying to create a framing device for their show. And so they have to make it look like everything was leading up to this. And they can't have that thing they're leading up to be like somebody that they didn't interview. You know what I mean? So like they'll make like a big thing, like everything was leading up to this, and they need somebody to represent what that was leading up to talk about. And if they can't, then they'll replace it with something else. And that's what they did with Dragon Quest, where they did Final Fantasy instead of Dragon Quest.
I really think the main reason they have Hip Tanaka on there is because they really want to talk to Miyamoto about Donkey Kong.
So they got somebody else who was involved in it.
Yeah, they got somebody else who was involved in it who was willing to do the interview.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's pretty obvious.
Yeah. So that's that's the point I was trying to make with it, is exactly that. It's, you know, go in with, if you're gonna watch it, go in with that understanding that you're not, you know, just kind of ignore the history stuff. If you, there's so much good history information and articles, books, other documentaries about what actually happened in you know, gaming history, that like this doesn't even hold a candle to it as far as that. What makes this show good is just like the fun little vignettes of like pixel art telling a story about a game counselor for Nintendo going through like a boot camp for game counselors, and how he and his crew wore like their Nintendo game counselor jackets to the food court at the mall and were treated like gods by the kids at the mall, you know? Like that's why you watch this, is for that stuff. That's what makes this fun to watch. Cause it tickles that nostalgia and kind of gives you some insight into some of these people that were involved in those things that you're aware of, but maybe just don't know, you know, haven't heard many stories of, like the game counselor stuff.
Right, yeah.
That's the reason to watch it. There's one, they do an episode where it starts focusing on Doom, and there's some really funny stuff with, like with Romero.
Alright.
So I'd recommend that. But let's move on. Let's talk about Lovecraft Country. So I said we're talking about season 1, episode 3, Holy Ghost. This episode was written by the showrunner of the series, Misha Green, and directed by Daniel Sackheim, who did the last episode that we talked about, the episode 2. So what I think is really interesting about this episode is that they framed it in kind of the exact context of like a modern, like haunted house, like horror movie.
Yeah.
They even had like the text go across the screen doing like the summary of, you know, 3 people moved into a house, you know, like, which is like such a common like trope thing you see in like haunted house style movies.
Yeah, they moved in and they disappeared forever, never to be seen again. You know? And then, you know, and it looks like the typical worn down haunted house. Like, you know, Letty apparently has bought this house, and it looks like a haunted house. But and she intends to turn it into a boarding house for the black community in Chicago. And of course, this is in the middle of the south side of Chicago.
I don't think so. I think that they're from the South Side.
It's in the white area.
Yeah, it's in the white area. Yeah, they moved into a white neighborhood.
Yeah, it's a white neighborhood. So obviously the residents there do not want them there, do not want them at that boarding house. And there's a lot of tension with that. But at the same time, like, the place is legitimately haunted.
Yeah. That's what I think is so interesting about it, is that they did the entire framing of this is like I said, like a haunted house horror movie, like a modern haunted house horror movie, like the way it's structured and stuff. But then as it starts developing, so you get that feeling, but then it's like you have these characters, in those roles. And then as it starts to develop, you start to get connections as to why this is happening around them. And by the end of the episode, it clues everything into the main mythos of the entire series. Like, it's not a random one-off episode. The whole thing's connected. Yeah, and that made it really interesting.
I was kind of like, okay, are the rest of the episodes just going to be like
random one-offs? Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, are we moved on to like a completely different narrative now? like I was unsure, but by the end they tie everything together.
And they gave it some sense of momentum too, where you're like, okay, I kind of know where this is going now.
But it's interesting because like this episode is very much Letty's story. Like we saw like in the previous, we saw in the previous episodes, Tick was the main protagonist. He kind of takes a backseat, and this becomes like Letty's show in this episode. She becomes the main protagonist.
The framing device sets up the story between her and her sister. It was only kind of hinted at in the first episode, kind of their relationship and the half-sibling relationship, and the kind of the relationship between them and their mother, and how their mother treated them differently, and all that kind of stuff comes into play throughout this episode. And is a big part of it, and it shows Letty's kind of struggles to she's trying to kind of portray herself one way, and some of that's somewhat inaccurate, like she kind of tries to portray herself as like the life of the party. But there's a scene that kind of was a little bit surprising where she and Tick had sex, and then Tick pulls his fingers away and there's like blood on them, and she makes an excuse that it's like her period. And I think my initial reaction to that was like, I think they're not just gonna play that off as that. Like, is something wrong with her? Is she like sick or something? And then you end up finding out by the end of the episode that she was a virgin. And she kind of like lets it slip in a way that Tick doesn't even get it at first, and it takes him a second, and then it dawns on him. And it's a surprise to him, I think, in the same way it would be a surprise to us, is that she doesn't portray herself as the little innocent virgin girl, you know what I mean? Like, she portrays herself as kind of like the party girl, that probably called a slut by other girls, kind of character.
Well, she portrays herself as worldly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then you find out like, okay, she's actually really inexperienced. And I think that, outside of sexual experience, I think that is like a metaphor for like her entire character, that she portrays herself as worldly, not just in a sexual spectrum, but in other ways, and that she's not.
Right.
That she's more innocent in all things than she portrays herself to be. And I thought that was kind of like a cool take on her character that gave her a little bit more depth,
For sure.
Cause they kept her credible. They gave her like her badass moments and kept her credible, but then they diminished the kind of like, oh, she's like a perfect badass female character type thing by kind of giving us some insight that she has insecurities and she has issues and things that were only previously hinted at, and now we kind of get like a much fuller picture of that. So that was cool. What else should we really talk about? I mean, I guess, there's a lot to talk about, but what's next would probably be, let's talk a little bit about, Tick's family, Uncle George's family.
Well, yeah, so.
Hippolyta and
Diana. So Hippolyta is really struggling with the death of, her husband George, who we know died last episode, in Artem. And basically what's going on with that is like, they basically explained it to her that a white racist sheriff shot him and killed him. And
specifically the sheriff that they encountered in the first episode, Eustace Hunt.
Yes, specifically him. And that they took care of the sheriff, and they brought the body back and had it buried, but she But as she says, like, towards the middle of the episode, she's not buying that as being the whole story.
Yeah. She's clearly, not only does she feel lied to, but they're doing a good job of portraying this character that was very warm and loving, and then you're getting this kind of animosity between her and Tick now.
Yes.
Like, she's clearly not happy with him being there. She's clearly got some resentment. She's clearly, like, put some blame on her husband's death, clearly on him without even knowing the details about it. She's putting that on him, and you can feel that throughout it, that, like, in George dying, Tick has kind of not just lost George, but lost his connection to the side of his family.
Yes, exactly.
So, it's like they did a really good job of portraying that and portraying her frustration and anger and stuff. And it even comes when she has a conversation with, I believe she's talking to Letty about.
She's talking to Letty at, the party Letty's having.
A housewarming party.
The housewarming party she's having at her boarding house.
And she's like expressing certain things, and Letty's like, is Tick reminding you of George? And she's saying no. Like, he might be doing things that George has done, like the way he'll put away a dish or something. But what's bothering her isn't that it reminds her of George. It's that she has like this resentment towards Tick.
Yeah.
Because she knows something's not being told to her. And beyond that she just has an underlying, like, I like that they kind of portrayed it as if she was going to say more and didn't.
Yeah.
Like, they had a moment where she was kind of like, it's just, or she said something along those lines and just stopped. Like, the idea that, like, she knew she had, like, a certain level of resentment that was not really well explainable. And instead of, like, doing that and subjecting herself to criticism for it, she just cut herself off, you know? And that's kind of like a very, like, human thing to have, you know? It's not as tight as you usually get in a narrative because it's more, like, realistic, you know? That's kind of a human reaction. That these resentments will come up, and even if they're not, what I say, even if they're not logical, they're there, they're real to you, you know? And I like the way they portrayed that. Like, her anger over the situation with George was, like, really believable, you know?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Before we get into kind of like the events in the haunted house, I wanted to bring up, there's a few, like, kind of, one thing the show does really well is it weaves in little, like, actual nuggets of history.
Right.
And there's a few in here that are worth bringing up that are tied directly to the story, but one that isn't as directly tied in that I thought was really cool. Like, I read an article about it afterwards. So this isn't something that's made explicit in the show, but, like, if you read about it, you might have heard about this, is that there is a moment in which Diana, Tick's cousin, or maybe sister, based on what by the end of the first episode.
She mentions Martin Luther King starting a movement.
Oh no, that's not what I was going to talk about. What I was talking about is she was using a Ouija board with her friends, like, in the house, and, you know, they kind of play off something kind of creepy going on, but in particular, and this is like a really clever embed that I think, like, it's so clever that most people will never know about it, but, like, it's one of those things that once you read about it, it's kind of tragic and really fitting, and it's that there's a moment in which one of the boys she is using the Ouija board with, they call him Bobo, and he asks the question, am I going to have a good time on my trip? And the Ouija board thing immediately jumps over to no. Yeah. And this is like one of the fast movement things that kind of implies, like, it's not the kids moving it, that something else is going on. And why this is important is that in 1955, there is a boy named Emmett, who went by the nickname Bobo Till. So Emmett Till. He was visiting family in Mississippi. He was 14 years old, and he was lynched. He was lynched and killed, apparently for flirting with a white woman, but the white woman later came forward and said that wasn't even true. So just for flirting with a white woman, which wasn't even true, this child was murdered.
Right,
and this happened in 1955 in Mississippi, same name. And he said, remember what he said was, am I going to have a good time on my trip?
Right, and it said no.
Yeah, this is like, once you learn the story, it's like, oh my God, they suck a gut punch in there that most people aren't even going to know. You know, like, people that are aware of that just got that gut punch straight up. The people that don't, you know, you just kind of, you don't know what that moment means. But, like, if you just, you know, look up an article about this episode or something, you might stumble across that. And it's like, holy shit. This is something that the show's been really good at, is inserting these, like, real moments of actual racism and putting them into the story. And it's not just, like, general stuff like, oh, sunset towns were real, or, oh, you know, Aunt Jemima was a real derogatory thing, but actual specific examples, that they've somehow fit in. And there's a few of these. I put up an article in our show notes. Esquire did an article if you want to, anybody listening wants to look it up. Look up Esquire Lovecraft Country episode 3, and you should find they have a thing where it shows some of the historical things. There's something about Martin Luther King with the rock being thrown at him. It also talks about what the general plot is of this episode, which is that this house is haunted that they're in, and the house is haunted by 9 spirits. There's a white man who basically abducted 8 black people and just did horrific experiments on them. And it goes into specific examples of things that are in that are actually true. So there wasn't this one guy that committed horrific experiments on 9 people, but there's direct references. There's people that are named in this episode that were some of those 8 people that were actually experimented on by cruel, sadistic, white people in history, that these are
right.
True examples of. One in particular it mentions there is a guy who's basically hailed as the father of gynecology, and he created these methods used in gynecological medicine. He created these methodologies by experimenting on these 2 black women that he had in his household, that he would perform surgeries on their genitals and stuff, unnecessary surgeries to practice and perfect his methods against their wills. It's horrifying. And he's basically heralded as the father of gynecology, and he invented some of the gynecological tools that are still used today and stuff. There's statues of him in hospitals and stuff. And he literally tortured black women to learn his methodology. And they cite that specific example that 2 of these victims have 2 of the names of the victims that Letty announces when she's talking about who the victims were in this haunted house match up with the names of these actual real life women that were tortured.
Right.
So yeah. So I if you're into the show and you want to get historical context, I highly recommend looking up that article. Again, it's from Esquire. So just look up Lovecraft Country episode 3 Esquire, and there's a lot of historical information there that's pretty fascinating.
Right. Yeah, definitely. That's basically what it is. It's basically the ghosts. There's the various spirits of the people that were experimented on and murdered in that house are trapped by the spirit of the guy actually doing the murdering and the experimenting himself. He is this very powerful evil spirit that has them all trapped there. And basically what ends up happening is they bring in this woman to do an exorcism, and she gets possessed. And then Tick gets possessed, and basically Letty has to call on the spirits of the victims to help her expel this evil spirit from the house.
That was a cool moment, as they were holding hands and they were chanting with the woman that they had brought in to fight against the spirit, this mantra that she had. And you see all of them kind of healing.
Yeah.
So these people are like a baby's head on this man's body, and these surgical experiments that this guy had done on these people. And you see them kind of reverting back to their original selves as they're doing this moment. It was a really kind of cool moment of closure for their stories, I guess, to kind of give them some peace.
It was a really cool closure because you could see they were getting better as the evil spirit was getting worse and deteriorating. Yeah. That was really awesome.
They also had the cool bit, which is going to be the probably thing that people remember most from this episode, which is that through this episode you had this white ghost that was the one, the torturer of the group.
Yeah.
That was telling Letty to get out of his house and stuff. And when he was possessing Tick, he was get out of my fucking house, get out of my fucking house. And then right at the end, when he's completely weakened and they finally expel his spirit, Letty yells, get out of my fucking house. Which is a very cathartic moment, to kind of turn the tables,
And again, as with the other episodes, there's a dual threat because they not only have the spirit to contend with, they also have their racist neighbors surrounding them, so they're doing stuff.
Those scenes make me so mad.
They do. They piss you off.
Yeah, when the police officers drove by and stuff and just didn't do anything. It was it makes you so angry, especially with what's going on right now.
Oh yeah, it's definitely relevant to what's going on right now. They put there's the whole scene where they put the burning cross in the lawn, and Letty is fed up, like Tick, and like they gather a bunch of people, and Letty goes out there and she starts busting up those cars with like a bat, like the cars they had parked out there with like the fucking bricks like tied to the horns, so the horns would be blaring 24/7.
Yeah.
And she starts busting up those cars, and then that's when like the cops like arrest her, and they basically like this is part that drives like the plot that drives like to Letty's like realization of what's going on. The cops are basically having her tossed around the back of the car while that one the police chief, I guess he was the chief, ends up grilling her about like how she came into possession of the house.
Yeah, the police officer that's in the back with her, I don't know if it's the chief or a captain or what, but he's holding on to like a support, and he grabs onto that, and then the car starts like swerving wildly, which is like
it's like going like back, and she's being tossed around and like beat to shit, and he's asking her all these questions about the house, and how she came into possession of it, and then I guess at some point they let her go. And that kind of leads her to like investigate the history of the house. But yeah, that was a horrifying scene. That was like, the sad thing is like, you can't say that was the 50s, because cops now would do that. Yeah. Let's face it. The cops today would do that shit.
Yeah, let's be honest, like we know this kind of shit is going down. Maybe not this exact specific instance or case, but like this kind of shit is still going down. We know that. So it's one scene I did like that happened right before that, when she was busting up the cars, was they had this thing happen where Tick's aunt, who is at the party, like pulls her car out, like as Letty is like destroying everything, as like all the men from the house are like holding guns to keep the white neighbors from approaching and stopping her. And then she pulls her car out and pops the trunk, and everybody just, right as before the police show up, they just dump all their weapons, the bats, everything into the trunk, close it, and she hauls off. And it's a great moment because it shows a sense of practice that like this is something they might have done before, Right. And I really liked that, the way it was done, like in this very unspoken way. Like she didn't say, put all your weapons in here and I'll get them away. So it's like, no, everybody knew. She pulled up, opened the trunk, everybody knew what to do, It was like a practiced thing. It was like, this is how the community survives. Like they're able to take some action back, and this is how they're able to do it, and they all know the score. And so I really dug that. I dig scenes like that, where it's just kind of like, there's an implication that like, oh yeah, we don't have to explain this. They know, they're living this. They know this. This doesn't have to be told to them. It's just something they know. And I really dig that in this series in general. And that's like a really good example of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And then finally, Tick ends up finding the woman from Artem, the daughter of Adam. I guess he call her.
Right before that, we should say that we finally find out that the place where Letty got this money from. The whole time I thought maybe she had stolen something from Artem and like sold it, something valuable. Which like, no, I'm not saying that to like blame her. Like fuck everybody in Artem, Like that was kind of what it felt like. Like she came back from this horrific experience and suddenly had money, But she ends up revealing to her sister that the money came from her mother, from their shared mother. They're half siblings, but they have the same mother. And that the mother had left everything to her, who hadn't even gone to the funeral. And it really puts this healing moment in this episode of them healing over, like moving into this house together and stuff, was basically just destroyed in an instant. And that realization that like Letty, was the only one that got the money. And Letty's like, I didn't tell you because I didn't want to hurt you. And she's like, you could have split the money with me and my brother, but instead you just bought this house and did that all for yourself to make your own choices instead of like, like there's ways you could have done this that would have been fair and you didn't do it, and played off Letty as being selfish. And it shows a character flaw in who Letty is,
Right, yeah.
But move on. So that brings us to the end of the episode with, as you said, Tick confronting Christina, who he sees in town. He sees her silver Bentley and her going into a store, and he follows her in.
Yeah. And she basically reveals like that the guy, the evil spirit in the house, was actually a member of the Sons of Artem. He'd stolen some pages from the Book of Life and was using them for his was using those pages as the basis for his experiments. And so basically she reveals to Tick that she's there to try and recover those pages that he stole so that so that she can combine them with the pages that they already had and decipher the entire language of Adam, I guess, which apparently if she fully understands the language of Adam, that would apparently give her ultimate power.
Well, the implication she makes is that everything that the Sons of Adam have been able to do, all of their spells and stuff, have come from a single page.
Right.
Book of names. And like the implication is that this huge book of names, that they can't decipher all of it, that they're still deciphering that one page. And if they can decipher the whole thing with all the power that came from just that one page, imagine the amount of power they would have deciphering the whole book, you know?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So apparently what had happened is, for the lore, is that there is a man named, Horatio Winthrop, and he's the one that stole the pages. And then the ghost that was in that house was Hiram Epstein, and he was like one of Horatio's like followers or like, pupils or whatever. He was like one of Horatio's men, so to say. And so like it ties in this ghost in this house that was doing this horrific experience, direct connection to the Sons of Adam and the whole secret society. And it makes that connection, and the money that Letty thought was from her mom and apparently was already invested in this house, not like something that she bought separately, was all arranged by Christina. It wasn't Letty's actual mom that had left that stuff. So Christina manipulated that to get them involved in her case. So Christina is kind of coming across now as like maybe the big bad of the series or the season, I guess. She manipulated the death of her father. She mentioned how she did that her father had a spell of invulnerability, but that he had to like dismiss it in order to do the ritual, that he died during. And then we know that she put that ring on Tick that ended up causing all that like black aura to come out that ended up killing all of the Sons of Adam. That was like put on his finger by her. So we know there's like this direct connection that Christina basically made that happen, used Tick in order to kill her father.
Right, exactly.
And now we see that she's going beyond that she's hunting down more pages, and she's trying to secure more power and trying to become powerful by collecting the rest of the Book of Names. So yeah, it's that kind of gives us direction forward, and Tick basically is going to kill her. But he can't. Like, her magic, like, stops him in his tracks. And she has, like, a chilling line that ties back into the racism again, when she says, you need to be smarter about this, Tick. You can't kill a white woman.
Right.
And, like, she's exerting her dominance or power over him, her societal power over him in that position, but also magical power over him at the same time. So, yeah, that's where it kind of leaves off. We get one other shot, which was interesting, which was there had been 3 white neighbors that had broke into, as this whole seance thing is going on to try to get rid of this ghost and this racist ghost in the basement of this house. 3 of the white neighbors break in and all basically get killed by the ghost or some other force within that house. They get, like, magically murdered.
No, they got murdered by the spirits of the victims.
Well, we know the one approached them that caused them to get burned up by 2 of them to get burned up, and then we also know the elevator took out one. So the implication is that it's the spirits of these black people in this house that directly killed them.
Yeah, it's definitely what happened.
But the way it ends is that you see that their bodies got dropped off because it follows the elevator as it goes down, not to the basement, but to like a secret area below there. And you see, like, as the elevator's going down, you see like runes lighting up that are like, I guess, blocking passage or something so it's only people that have the magic or something that can access it. And it goes into this like underground tunnel that seems to stretch for quite some distance that we never saw before in the show. This isn't part of the basement or the secret room. This is something completely different. And the bodies are just there along with a bunch of other skeletons that are down this pathway. So what's going on there? Are these other white people that have moved into that house and have died or something? Like,
it's not going to be revisited, so it doesn't matter.
It's still a cool like moment. It's kind of like a little chilling moment that they're living on top of this, and we don't know what it is. Is this like something that was created by the white ghost that owned this house, or was this created by his victims, you know? And are all these skeletons, are these bodies, are these all of like white people that had moved into this house or something, or had come into this house unwanted before that they were able to kill? Like, we don't know what that is, you know? Like it kind of makes like almost like an underground railroad like kind of connection as far as like a secret thing, but we don't really know what that is. If it's like who's responsible for that tunnel, you know?
Right.
So it probably won't be revisited. I kind of hope it is though, because it's just, there's enough cool stuff there. But even if it isn't, it's just kind of cool that there's this like underlying other magical thing that's just there, you know?
Right, sure.
So that's it for this episode. Next week, we are not going to be talking about Lovecraft Country because this Friday, the first 3 episodes of The Boys come out. So that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be discussing the first 3 episodes of The Boys season 2. And then the week after that, we're going to catch up on, so we'll be caught up on both series after that. Because The Boys is going to be releasing week to week alongside Lovecraft Country. It's only the first week that they're releasing 3 episodes back to back. And because it's 3 episodes, we just decided we can't do those 3 episodes plus an episode of Lovecraft Country. It's just too much, you know? So,
right.
So we're just going to talk about The Boys next week. And then after that, we'll kind of catch up on both Lovecraft Country and the next episode of The Boys. So 3 episodes of The Boys next week. The week after that'll be 2 episodes of Lovecraft Country and 1 episode of The Boys. And then we'll be caught up from that point. So that's kind of what to expect from us for the next couple of weeks. But here's what's coming up on TV in the next couple of weeks. We're recording this on Monday, August 31st. This Joker with Will Smith came out on Quibi. Wireless also came out on Quibi. On Tuesday, September 1st, Transplant is coming on NBC. On Thursday, September 3rd, AP Bio returns on Peacock. That's a really funny show, so I'm excited about that. Raised by Wolves comes to HBO Max. That's the new series from Ridley Scott that looks pretty like kind of high budget and interesting. And Young Wallander comes to Netflix, which is a new British series. On Friday, September 4th, The Boys, which we're going to be discussing next week on the podcast, comes to Amazon Prime. And Away comes to Netflix. On Sunday, September 6th, Power Book 2 Ghost, the spin-off series to Power, comes to Starz. And Undercover comes to Netflix. On Wednesday, September 9th, Woke comes to Hulu. And LA's Finest debuts on Spectrum. It's also going to be on Fox, I believe, but it's going to air first on Spectrum. They've done that a few times with both like Spectrum and Dish Network, where they'll get like a limited exclusivity on a series and then it like comes to like network TV later or something. So that's just another example of that. So if you have Spectrum, you can watch LA's Finest. If not, then wait a couple of months and then it'll be on Fox. On Thursday, September 10th, the Idhun Chronicles comes to Netflix, as does Julie and the Phantoms. On Friday, September 11th, Duchess comes to Netflix. On Sunday, September 13th, Our Cartoon President comes to Showtime. Tigtone comes to Adult Swim. And Vandervalk comes to PBS. And lastly, on Monday, September 14th, The Third Day miniseries comes to HBO, and We Are Who We Are miniseries comes to HBO. So they're going to have just 2 miniseries running on Mondays from that point on.
That's good.
So we're at the end of our podcast, and as I mentioned, we want to, at this point, say rest in peace or rest in power to Chadwick Boseman, Black Panther himself, tragically passed away of colon cancer. He's had the diagnosis for, I believe it said 3 or 4 years. Basically, like, through, not during the filming of Black Panther, but like through the promotion of Black Panther and everything he's done since then. He's had stage 3 colon cancer that eventually spread to stage 4. And it's tragic, but at the same time, it's kind of inspiring that this guy basically knew he was going to die and he was doing some of his best work.
Yeah. I mean, he was amazing. I didn't know much about him before Black Panther.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I watched that.
He was just an up and comer when Black Panther, yeah. He'd only done like
right.
a few other things.
Right. I saw like he was amazing in that film, and then learning that he was struggling with cancer this whole time. It's amazing to me.
He was putting out like 2-3 movies a year. He was just amazing. He was like really like just blowing up as a household name.
Like, yeah, I mean, he is definitely an inspiration, and it's just that it's an incalculable loss for the world, in my opinion. It's just the world, this is going to kind of sound corny, but I truly believe the world lost a hero.
Yeah, definitely. And it's one of those cases where you can go back and look at interviews he's done during this entire period in which he's known he's had colon cancer. And you can see kind of the work he's done with children that are suffering from cancer, some of which that he had worked with and visited and spent time with, who never got to see Black Panther, but were so excited to see it and never got the chance to.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And you can kind of see his emotional reaction to it now, and it just has added context now that we know kind of what was going on with him. And the fact that he kept it quiet, he never asked for sympathy, he never asked for, any attention on himself, but he quietly just went to work, and he kept the dignity to him, and he just went to work and took on like the best roles of his life, took on major historical figures and a huge like comic book hero that's it's not just a big comic book role, but it's like a huge thing for the Black community to have like this representation of this character, and that he brings this character to life with like a lot of attention and love. Yeah, it's just kind of, it's amazing the way he took his diagnosis and what he did with that information. I think a lot of people at that point would just kind of give up and go into kind of a self-pity mood because it sucks. And like, I couldn't blame somebody for doing that. If I got a cancer diagnosis, I probably wouldn't do anything. It wouldn't inspire me to reach new heights in my career. It wouldn't inspire me to do that. I'd probably just be like, okay, I'm fucked. Everything's over. And I think a lot of people would, and I don't think that's something you could criticize somebody for doing. But the fact that he didn't shouldn't be the norm. That's something to admire about him, that he took his diagnosis kind of almost like as a challenge, not just to get better, but to like, do his best to make every step he could count, So yeah, that's just how I kind of wanted to end the podcast, to just say R.I.P. Chadwick Boseman. Wakanda forever.
Wakanda forever. Absolutely.
So if you want to reach us and talk to us, you can hit us up on Twitter. I'm at Tyson Gifford. Will is at Voxel Hero. You can check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, as well as our site, thetitlescreen.com. You can subscribe to this podcast through any major podcast client like iTunes or Pocket Cast, and the entire backlog of our podcast is available on our YouTube channel. Thank you everybody for listening. Again, Wakanda forever.
If you would like to reach out to us and make a comment, send an email to contact@thetotalscreen.com. Stay tuned to The Total Screen for the very best in genre television.